My husband tried to take the house my dad gave me. When I found out he married me for my money, he said I was paranoid and needed to trust him more. It was supposed to be a fairy tale. I never imagined I'd end up here, standing at the edge of my marriage, staring down the barrel of a reality I couldn't unsee. When I met Ben, everything felt like it fell into place. He was charming, caring, always attentive, things that made me feel like the luckiest woman alive. We clicked instantly. Our conversations were effortless, and the chemistry between us undeniable. For the first time, I thought maybe love, real love, had finally found me. We moved in together quickly. It wasn't like I was rushing into anything, I just had this overwhelming sense that he was the one. He told me he wanted to build a life with me, that he saw a future with me. In hindsight, I should have asked myself what that future actually looked like. Because it wasn't the one I envisioned. No, it was a future where I, unknowingly, became a means to an end. The first sign of trouble didn't come until after we got married. Sure, I had always been cautious with my finances. My father had been adamant about teaching me to be independent and never rely on anyone, not even him. But my dad's gift to me was the house. It wasn't just property, it was a symbol of his love, his security for me. It was my anchor in a world that sometimes felt uncertain. I'd been living in that house for a few years, even before meeting Ben. It wasn't a mansion, but it was mine, a modest 3-bedroom home with a garden and enough space to breathe. But Ben didn't see it that way. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, he started making comments about the house, about how it was too big for just one person, how we could sell it and get something better. It was subtle at first, the way he would hint at the idea, but it started to nag at me. I brushed it off. Maybe he was just being practical, thinking ahead. Maybe it was his way of suggesting we take the next step together. But the more he mentioned it, the more it didn't feel like a suggestion. It felt like an expectation. Then came the day that shattered everything. I had been busy with work when I came home and noticed something odd. There was a folder sitting on the kitchen counter, one that I didn't recognize. I wasn't snooping, I simply assumed it was something Ben was dealing with, maybe paperwork for our joint accounts. But then I saw the words House Transfer Agreement on the top page. My heart dropped. I had no idea what that could mean. When I picked it up, I saw that it wasn't just any transfer agreement, it was a legal document to transfer the ownership of the house from my name to both of our names, effectively making the property joint ownership. Ben had already signed it. I remember the cold rush of fear that gripped my chest, that pit in my stomach that I couldn't shake. This wasn't just a suggestion anymore. It wasn't about upgrading to a bigger place. No, it was a clear, calculated move to take what was mine. I could feel my pulse racing as I tried to wrap my mind around it. How had he done this? Why had he done this without telling me? I confronted him that night. His response was almost casual, as though this was just a minor inconvenience, a misunderstanding. "Oh, I thought we'd talked about this before," he said, brushing it off like it was no big deal. "It's just a formality, you know? We're married now, it's all part of combining our lives." My stomach churned with disbelief. The more he spoke, the more the pieces began to fit together, not in the way I hoped, but in the way that confirmed all my worst fears. Ben wasn't just after a house, he was after control. He had been working, slowly and steadily, to tie everything to him, to make sure that I had no way out. The house, my father's gift to me, had been the first step. "You know this house was my father's gift, right?" I asked, my voice shaking with a mix of anger and confusion. Ben didn't even flinch. "It's just paperwork, babe. We're in this together now. Isn't that what marriage is all about?" His voice was smooth, convincing. But I could see the glint in his eyes, the one that made me want to scream. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to do. But it wasn't just the house that was starting to make sense, it was everything. The gifts, the compliments, the promises of a perfect life together. Ben had always known what to say to make me feel wanted, to make me feel like I was special. But somewhere along the way, I began to realize that it wasn't me he loved. It was my money. The way he had carefully inserted himself into my life, the way he had woven himself into my financial security, began to feel like a carefully crafted plan. It wasn't love. It was a strategy. A cold, calculated move. And that realization, that truth, hit me harder than anything else ever could. I wanted to confront him again, to demand answers, but there was something in the way he looked at me, so calm, so composed, that made me hesitate. It wasn't guilt I saw in his eyes. It wasn't regret. It was something else, something darker, something that made me feel like I was the one who had been played. That night, I couldn't sleep. I couldn't stop thinking about the house, about the betrayal, and about the man I thought I knew so well. Was everything a lie? I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. What else had he been hiding from me? What else had he planned? But I wouldn't wait long to find out. Because the truth, like the house, had only just begun to reveal itself. The next few days felt like a blur. My thoughts were spinning, racing around the realization of what Ben had just done. The house, the transfer agreement, his casual dismissal of everything that had once been mine. I couldn't stop thinking about it. But there was something deeper, something darker, gnawing at me. I had a growing suspicion that it wasn't just about the house. No, it was bigger than that. This wasn't about property, it was about control, about money, about his plan to secure his future at my expense. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something. There had to be more. The house was just the surface, just the first sign. But Ben had always been so smooth, so charming. He knew exactly how to make me feel like everything was fine, like I was overreacting. He'd tell me that it was just a legal technicality, that it was the natural course of things once we were married. He made it sound so rational, so simple, but the knot in my stomach twisted every time I heard his voice. I knew I had to dig deeper. I needed to know the truth, the whole truth. And so I began to search. I went through the financial records, the bank statements, everything I could find. At first, it seemed like I was just being paranoid, as Ben had accused me of before. But the more I looked, the more I started to see the pattern. The expensive gifts he'd bought me when we first met, the lavish vacations he'd insisted on, the way he always seemed to have a perfect explanation for everything, as though he had been planning for all of it. But one particular moment stood out. One conversation that would change everything. It was a Sunday afternoon, and we were sitting together in the living room. Ben was scrolling through his phone, as usual, while I tried to focus on a book. I wasn't in the mood for idle chatter, but then he said something that caught my attention. "You know, I've been thinking," he began, his voice casual, as if he was just making small talk. "With your father's passing, it'll be nice to have something stable. Something that will set us up for life. It's just a matter of getting everything in place, and then we can really start building our future." His words were so offhand, but something about them struck me as wrong. Why was he bringing up my father's death? It wasn't just the passing reference to my father's money, but the way he said it. There was something cold about it, like he was discussing a business transaction, not the memory of a loved one. It was the kind of thing you say when you've been planning for a long time. When you've been waiting for the right moment to make your move. I dropped my book and looked at him, my heart hammering in my chest. "What do you mean by that?" He looked up from his phone, his face a picture of innocence. "I just mean that your dad's assets, his investments, the house, all of it, it'll be a nice foundation for us. You've worked hard for everything you have, and now we get to enjoy the benefits together." I felt my blood run cold. I couldn't shake the sense that I was being sold a story, a carefully rehearsed line that had been planned long before our marriage. The house wasn't just a house. It was the key to something more, something I had never fully understood until now. But that wasn't the worst part. No, the worst part came a few hours later when I went into our shared computer files, looking for more evidence, something I could hold on to. And there it was. A hidden folder, tucked away deep in the system. I didn't know how I hadn't noticed it before, but now it was glaring at me. The folder was labeled Our Future, and inside were a series of documents, bank account details, property assessments, legal contracts, things that had nothing to do with our actual lives together, things that shouldn't have been there. I opened one file, and my stomach dropped. It was a spreadsheet. At first, it looked like a simple budget, but then I saw the categories I hadn't seen before. Assets, investments, property deals. And then, the chilling line, wife's inheritance. My inheritance. My father's money. My house. It was all there, detailed in a way that felt almost clinical, like it was already part of a larger plan. I scrolled down further, each entry more disturbing than the last. My name, my bank accounts, everything I had worked so hard to build, listed in a column titled, Future Assets to Claim. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Ben had been preparing for this for months, maybe even longer. He wasn't just my husband. He was a man who had married me for one reason: my money. I sat there, frozen, unable to process what I was seeing. How could I have been so blind? How had I not seen this coming? Every little detail I had brushed off, every excuse he'd given, every time I had doubted myself, now they all made sense. It wasn't just about love. It was about securing his future, using me as his stepping stone. The anger that surged through me was unlike anything I'd ever felt before. It burned, it twisted in my chest, and it pushed me to the edge of a decision I wasn't sure I was ready to make. I knew I had to confront him, but how could I do that when everything I thought I knew about our relationship had been a lie? I didn't say anything to Ben that night. I couldn't. My emotions were too raw, too volatile. Instead, I spent hours, the rest of the night, going through every file, every detail, trying to make sense of it all. And as the sun began to rise, it became clear I had been played, manipulated, and used. But there was still one thing left. One final piece of the puzzle that I needed to uncover before I confronted him. What exactly did he plan to do with all of this? How far had he gone to ensure that I would never leave him, that I would never see what he had done until it was too late? As I stared at the screen, the answer became glaringly obvious. I had to know everything. Every part of his plan, every move he'd made, and every lie he'd told. Because once I knew the truth, there would be no going back. I couldn't unsee what I had learned, and I couldn't live in a world where I continued to trust someone who had built their entire future on my misery. The next step was clear. But I had to wait. I had to plan. Because the truth was more dangerous than I had ever imagined. And once I confronted him, there would be no turning back. I couldn't wait any longer. The truth was unbearable, and I had to face Ben. I called him into the living room, holding the folder with the evidence I had uncovered. My pulse raced, but I couldn't back down now. Ben came in, smiling as usual. "What's up?" he asked, looking casual, like nothing was wrong. I slammed the folder on the table. "Explain this." His eyes flicked to the papers, but he quickly composed himself. "What's this about?" His voice was too calm, too practiced. I leaned forward. "What is this? A plan for our future? A plan built on my money?" Ben paused for a moment before his usual calm took over. "It's just some planning, babe. Nothing to worry about. We're married now, remember? We combine our lives." I shook my head, heart pounding. "No, Ben. You've been using me. From the start, you married me for my inheritance, my house. I wasn't just your wife, I was a means to an end." His expression barely changed, but I saw a flicker of something cold in his eyes. "You're being paranoid," he said, his voice dropping to a soothing tone. "I love you. Why would you think otherwise? You're overreacting." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "I'm overreacting? You've been hiding documents, making plans behind my back. You tried to take my house without even telling me. And now you want me to trust you." Ben leaned back, trying to sound rational. "We're in this together, right? Isn't that what marriage is about? You need to trust me. We're building a future together." The words were a slap. I could feel the manipulation crawling over me. "No, Ben. This isn't about trust. This is about control. You don't love me. You've been using me for my wealth. And now, you're trying to gaslight me into thinking I'm crazy for pointing it out." He remained calm, but I could see his grip on the situation slipping. "Don't make this harder than it has to be," he said, trying to sound reasonable. "We can work this out. You're just emotional right now." I stood up, heart racing. "I'm done, Ben. I'm not your cash cow. I've been a fool, but not anymore." His face twisted for the first time, his smile faltering. "You can't just walk away from this." I took a deep breath, the weight of the moment sinking in. "I already did. I turned and walked out of the room, leaving him behind. There was no turning back now. The truth had set me free, but Ben? He was left to face the consequences of his lies. And I wouldn't be there to pick up the pieces.